Call Simon Bridges.
Speaker, it's good to take a call on the Private Security Personnel and Private Investigators Bill. And can I just pick up on a couple of the comments made by the Minister in this reading. He spoke quite rightly about how this bill really does modernise this area of law. We've got a 35-year-old piece of legislation, actually a bit over that, and of course it's really quite right that we come back and we modernise this area, because we're dealing with an area, as I think Chris Hipkins said, and I agreed with him on this point, where technology plays a very substantial role, where the use of new surveillance devices, recording devices, computers, and the ability of people to listen in, watch, see, observe what others do, it has never been greater. And so I think we often stand in this House, we often hear speeches in this House about how the law is being modernised, but that is particularly important in relation to this legislation, given the nature of what it's dealing with, security and investigation, and given the technological advances we've seen in this area. And, I think, for example, of a story I read in the Herald, I think earlier this week, where the chief press officer for the current Prime Minister in the United Kingdom is involved in a series of stories because he was at one time editor of News of the World, and they were at that time, and his position I think is that he wasn't aware of this, but they were at that time when he was editor in quite a substantial way tapping into members of Parliament's phone calls, listening into what they were saying, into ministerial phone calls, and I think, for example, one of the alleged cases was an alleged affair by the then Deputy Prime Minister John Prescott. So you can see, as I say, what technological advances mean in this kind of area where investigations really can become quite intrusive. And so, as I say, the law does need modernising, and this bill does just that. Could I pick up also on another thing that the Minister said, and that's that we are really striking the right balance here. And again, we hear that quite a bit, but again, it very much is the case here, where on the one hand, if you get things wrong, you can have a lack of security and real problems on that end of the ledger in our society. And on the other, if you're not careful, you can have, as I think some would argue they do in the United Kingdom, a surveillance state where you can't go anywhere without being caught by security and CCTV and the like. So we are, in a very real way, putting forward a balanced bill, and a bill that modernises the area of law here. And at Select Committee, it would be true to say that Clause 66 was one of the most interesting debates we had. And I was going to say heated and controversial. Actually, I wouldn't characterise it that way. It was thoughtful. And certainly I thought the points raised by the likes of the Honourable David Carter were well-made points, although in the final analysis I didn't agree with them. And Clause 66, of course, was one that carried over provisions in the old 1974 Act prohibiting private investigators from taking or using photographs or recordings, really, of any kind. And I could understand, as I say, the position that Labor colleagues on that Select Committee took, that, look, this should be carried over because it really can be quite intrusive. But ultimately the position that I and I think other colleagues of mine came to was that if we took that to its logical conclusion, we were getting into actually quite a silly situation where private investigators couldn't do something that actually anyone else could. that individuals, private citizens, actually that journalists, some would say who don't always maintain the highest ethical standards could. And so we were getting ourselves into a silly situation, particularly when, as we have done, we've put in a code of conduct, or the provision and the requirement for a code of conduct for private investigators, so that they will be beholden to higher standards than private citizens will be in this area when taking photographs, when doing visual recordings. And let me just flesh out this point that I'm making. Actually, I was very mindful in Select Committee of the situations I had seen in court cases, and I must confess at the time I didn't realise the reason for this. It was only at Select Committee I did. But where in cases like ACC cases, WINS fraud cases, where police weren't involved, private investigators would be used to do the legwork and to really investigate whether the complaint that had been heard had any substance. And so you'd often have come along to court, and I can think of particular examples, a private investigator, someone privately paid with their own firm, who would not be presenting photographs but would laboriously go through what they had seen and observed. And I'd never really thought about why that was the case, but the reason, of course, is because they were under the old law, and we're changing it, prohibited from taking photographs and from doing video recordings. And think about this example, one example of a case excuse me, where a person on ACC with, it was said, a very bad back, was playing golf at a certain golf course really every single day. In fact, he'd put in his scorecards, he was one of the best golfers at the course. Now, common sense would suggest that all the private investigators should be doing is taking some photographs of this guy, or maybe a video recording of this guy swinging at the ball and playing some pretty good golf. As I say, under the old law they couldn't do that, and that seems to me silly. I mean, another example of a case where another man on ACC had one of the biggest private lawn mowing businesses in the Bay of Plenty. And again, actually quite difficult to prove that, where the person swears black and blue that they are not, they haven't been lawn mowing, but they've got a crook back, but in fact they're out lawn mowing every other day. If the private investigator, who, as I say, under this new law will be governed by a strict code of conduct, can't take photographs and the like. And I just contrast that again with the situation we have had and will continue to have, where actually citizens, any old citizen out on the street, will be able to take those photographs and do what the private investigator, who's beholden to a higher standard, couldn't. And of course we get into, to speak of another news of the world example, we get into cases like the one involving, as she's known, Fergie, where she was, by journalists, video recorded and caught in a very sort of compromising position. We would have had a situation in this country where everyone else could do that, but private investigators actually wouldn't do it because their code of conduct would probably prohibit that sort of unethical entrapment, wouldn't be able to. So I come back to it, Mr. Speaker. We're modernising the law. We've got a balanced piece of law. And in one of the interesting provisions, Clause 66, whilst I accept the points made by the Labour members as far as they go, that privacy is important and that we do need to be balanced and responsible in this area, I think it's right that we have a law where private investigators can, for legitimate purposes, often very much in the public interest, take photographs and video recordings to be used in court and the like if they're admissible, because they will be beholden to a strict code of conduct, which will mean that actually they should have the ability to do this, as I say, in the public interest.
Ko Carmel Sepuloni.